Right on cue, Taylor. Thank you so much. We'll go to the second slide. So as you know, I issued that executive order on Friday of last week requiring all of our students in Salt Lake City School District, whether they're public school, charter school, or private, to wear masks, as well as teachers and visitors. And we're hearing from our school district officials today that there is a majority of compliance and that schools are faring well today. So that's good news for all of us. I think it's good news for the families, and it's good news for our economy as well. The legal basis, of course, has been established, and we've shared that with you, council members. But I hope you know, I think you know from the way that we work together, that I didn't take this action lightly, and I didn't do it to pick a fight with the state legislature. But from the moment that the pandemic began, we've been committed to an overarching principle that our decisions will be guided by public health data and by the advice of our medical experts, and that protecting the health of our residents will always be my highest priority. So we're grateful that there's a majority of compliance with the order on this first day back to school for our school district, and we're hopeful that it will keep our students and staff protected so that our school district and our healthcare system won't befall the same path that we've seen in school districts across the country who opened without a mask mandate. Let's go to the next slide, please. We're still in that high transmission level. Cases are up again this week over last week, and quite dramatically so if you look at the same time last year. Our COVID ICU utilization is at 34%. And again, the state set that 15% COVID utilization as the standard that ended up being a part of repealing the endgame, or creating the endgame legislation standards being met. We're well above that right now, and our case rates are as well. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to keep bringing you the separated metrics on children, which are dramatically different also this year than they were last year. We've saw 963 kids in the last week under age 13 and under who tested positive, compared to 136 at this week last year. That red line is 2021 compared to the same period of time in 2020 with the green line. Go on to the next. And you see here really stagnant vaccination rates, only a percentage increase in 84104, and really hardly any increase at all in our other 3 zip codes that we've been tracking that have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. We're averaging 60% fully vaccinated citywide, and that's a stagnant number right now. Next slide. And the only demographic that you see a great uptick in is our American Indian or Alaska Native countywide demographic went from 52% to 60% vaccinated. It's great to see. I wish we saw an 8% jump in any other demographic, but every other one is closer to 1%. And next slide. I think we're coming up to, oh yes. So these two back to school event and neighborhood house summer celebration events happened, and there's another vaccination event coming up. The date is to be determined. We'll of course share it with council members and appreciate you sharing it with your communities. That'll be a part of the warm coat and clothing drive event as well. And I think our next slide brings us up to Andrew Johnston's portion of the update. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, you can see the numbers for the last week at the resource centers. Again, as typical, the Salt Lake City Resource Centers, the King and the Miller, are both running 95 essentially percent, 92% capacity. Overall, 3 at 89%. Still very good for the warm weather. And we continue to work on the winter overflow options. We'll have some updates for you coming up hopefully soon. Next slide. We had resource fairs planned. However, Kayak Court, well, talk about Kayak Court first. Kayak Court was changed this last Friday due to the weather, the heavy rainfall, which made it hard for them to get on the river. So they actually did essentially an in-place court at Cottonwood Park on the Jordan River, just north of North Temple. And they're working on scheduling a couple for September, or a resource fairs for September and a kayak court event as well. Still good success from both of those efforts. And we have seen an increase of folks on the river up and down, a lot of north and North Temple, but also going south and even south of the city limits. The HART team is also getting a lot of input on where to put portable restrooms in the city to be most effective for folks. So we'll take more information. Even if you have information you'd like to share, we'd love to hear that. And last week's camp abatements were put on hold again because of the weather, and they're being discussed again this week. Are there other questions maybe we can answer today for y'all?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
on the portable restrooms, Andrew, do you know when those are planned to be installed and how long they will be, and any more details about if there already is a short list? How can constituents request or make more suggestions?
Sure. Michelle Hoon, who I'm not sure she's on the call today, she manages all those logistics, a list of where to go based on the camp's sizes, needs. And we do that, a discussion weekly. So if there's folks who have ideas or requests, let's go right through the app is a good place to go, or you can call or email Michelle Hoon.
So that's like an ongoing thing when there's a need seen, restrooms would be installed and then potentially taken out when that need's no longer there.
Yeah, I mean, they're hard to sort of pick up and move immediately every few days. So once they're in place, we kind of want to leave them there for a bit. And then it's also a contract with the company to do it. So it's a scheduling piece as well. So it's not necessarily, I need it the next day, we get it in, and then a few days later we move it. Really trying to target those to higher frequency places. And we've seen far fewer camps of size downtown and in a lot of places we traditionally have seen them. So that's where we're taking more information to move them to more effective places.
And do you know how many there are throughout the city right now? Currently?
I don't actually. I can get that number though for you.
That'd be great, thank you.
Sure.
Madam Chair, sorry, Andrew, did I miss who's going to clean this up? Is there a budget request to have sufficient bathrooms or porta potties? Is there any more information on that? If I missed it, I'm sorry.
Budget request to increase the number of porta potties you're talking about?
To pay for porta potties and also to go clean it up and replace porta potties, and how many are we going to have? Where?
I don't know about plans to increase the number of porta potties. I can follow up and see if there are things being developed right now, but I'm not aware of them, Councilman Valdemoros.
Okay.
As far as placement of them, it is an ongoing discussion that can change based on the demand out there.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Next.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I have a question for the mayor's previous presentation on COVID cases and numbers, if that's okay.
Sure.
You know, last year it seemed like we had really good, in general, not just us, but the population in general had a really good idea, almost like a daily thing where we would know things like you already pointed out, ICU bed, occupation, you know, the rates and our end game and the things that all these milestones that we were going to hit to figure out the mask mandates and opening things up, etc. So how are we going to get that now specifically for the school population that has that mandate?
Yeah.
Because, like, I don't know how many kids right now are hospitalized and are in really critical condition. Is it spreading like crazily? Like, how are we going to measure this mandate and know when it's going to end, if it can end, you know?
Yeah, great question. I just popped the county dashboard in the chat, which Since last school year, they have added a schools tab. So you can then go down and select by school district, and then you can look by school within the school district at what the reported cases are. There's also still that age breakout, which could be helpful because there's charter schools and there's private schools, and those aren't listed under the school district to my knowledge. So we're not going to invent new standards, even though the state abandoned their standards with the endgame legislation. We are still, and based on the best advice from our county health partners, using those same standards. So that 191 positive cases per 100,000 people, which we live in a city with about 200,000 people. So you can take that up to 382 cases per Salt Lake City. That's a 14-day average. And then there's the COVID ICU utilization that as I said, the state set that 15% COVID utilization of ICU number. And we are reporting to you on what that standard or where we're at on that. And we're at 34% currently, I think. So we are going to keep relying on the health experts and the medical community to give us that data. We're not going to invent new standards, but we also understand from those health partners that vaccination rates are a piece of the answer to determine when the school district, especially for that vaccination eligible piece of the population, would be safe to remove their masks according to the health department. So vaccination rate right now for Salt Lake City students, we have 21,000 students in the district. Only obviously those 12 and older are eligible, and it's less than 50% of them have been vaccinated. So the county health department will be monitoring where that vaccination rate goes. And in addition, they've advised that we not just act when there is an appropriate number vaccinated, but that we look also at what the community spread rate is at that time. So there are a couple of factors, and I think it actually would be great to have Dr. Dunn join us in one of these meetings, either for the briefing at the beginning, or perhaps there's a broader conversation the council would like to host with Dr. Dunn to talk about that. But that's who we're relying on, and those are the metrics that we're hearing from the health and medical community that we should be watching.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And, I appreciate these updates. I think that we sort of are using them as well, the metrics, just to determine when it may be safe to go back to hybrid or in-person council meetings. So I appreciate that you provide this information as we can utilize it for us as well. So thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, of course.
I just ask you again to keep telling us what you want to see, and Councilmember Valdemoros, those were great questions. And I think our team will try to incorporate that more clearly into next week's slides, but keep us aware of how you'd like to see the information, and we'll evolve with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Madam Mayor, did you have any other updates at this time?
No, that's all. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We will move on to agenda item number 2, which is excuse me, an informational update on racial equity and policing. And I believe that Coletta is with us. Coletta, thank you so much for joining us. Coletta is our Chief Equity Officer, and we also have Allison Rowland from the Council Office. I will turn it over to Coletta first, and we'll go from there, unless Allison, am I missing anything? Okay, Coletta, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon. Thank you, City Council members, for allowing us time on your agenda today. And thank you to Mayor Mendenhall, City Council members, and the public for your continued support of our team and the work of the Human Rights Commission and the Racial Equity and Policing Commission, and also the Human Rights Commission, as I stated. I also want to thank the HRC and REP commissioners for their dedication, time, and commitment to this necessary and important work. And I am very appreciative of city staff, SLCPD, and the Langdon Group's work throughout phase 1 of this process. I am here to update you all on the makeup of the Salt Lake City Mayor's Equity and Inclusion Team and to bring forth a proposal with changes to the ordinance for the structure and next phase of the work of the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. Thank you to the equity and inclusion, to my equity and inclusion team members. The work that our team does would not be possible without each of you. And so I briefly want to introduce you to our team members before I get started. So Fatima Deary is our policy advisor for New Americans and refugees. She is responsible for coordination of the Know Your Neighbor volunteer program and also for making policy recommendations. Darby Egbert, recently she was part of the fire department, and we are so excited to welcome her back to the city as our equity coordinator for special projects. Darby is responsible for recognition of DEI milestones and celebrations. She also coordinates with our communications team and our community outreach team on DEI proclamations, and she manages the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And we have a citywide ambassadors program that Darby is currently working to develop and roll out. And then I would also like to welcome Moana Uwave Hafoka back to our team. She recently served in the city as a policy advisor for human rights and community liaison. And we're excited to welcome her back as equity manager, who's solely responsible for managing the Racial Equity and Policing Commission and the Human Rights Commission. I also want to thank Jessie Egan, who serves as my executive assistant. I am truly grateful for her support. And I am honored, as you all are probably already aware, to serve as the new Chief Equity Officer. I am currently working with consultants, Keen Independent Research, to help develop a citywide equity plan. And for more information on this process and how the public can be involved, you can call the study hotline that you can find on the website. And I will also provide this to City Council staff. But the website is www.keenindependent, and that's KEEN.com /Salt Lake City Equity 2021 /. And so to get to the highlight of the presentation to you all today, the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing was formed to examine SLCPD's policies, culture, and the budget and any city policies that influence SLCPD's culture or policies. The commission is composed of individuals who represent a broad and very diverse range of communities of color, expertise, and viewpoints in Salt Lake City. And the commission's core committee members were selected by Mayor Mendenhall and you city council members to lead in the structure of the commission, invite others to participate, and to create space for productive and inclusive discourse with the broad group of commissioners and diversity of opinions therein. With the support of the Langdon Group, the commission recently submitted their final phase 1 report. It is available for all to review and can be found on Salt Lake City's website under the Racial Equity and Policing tab, or you can go to slcrepcommission.com. We encourage the public that if you have feedback on that final report, please send that to commissioners at repcommission@slcgov.com. The proposed ordinance today that we bring before you, City Council members, is based on commissioners' feedback and staff observations as we supported the commission's works and processes over the last year. We recently met with the REP core commissioners who are in agreement with this proposal, and we met with leadership to run this proposal by them before coming to you. We have also provided this proposal to the Human Rights Commission as it will affect their coordination and alignment with racial equity and policing moving forward. And the highlighted changes are as follows. We're asking that at least one, but no more than 2 of the members of the Human Rights Commission shall serve on the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. Membership eligibility requirements for the Racial Equity and Policing Commission is independent of the eligibility requirements for the Human Rights Commission. As many of you may already know, Commissioner Salazar Hall and Commissioner Benuri currently serve on the HRC and the REP. And if allowed to remain this way, this would need to be updated in the ordinance. Also, the Human Rights Commission, we're asking that a portion be inserted into the ordinance where the Human Rights Commission may review recommendations bought by the Racial Equity and Policing Commission, and issue a position of opposition of support or support of those recommendations before they are moved forward to the mayor and city council. And then we are offering a change that we have run by the Racial Equity and Policing Core Commissioners to change the size of their commission to 15 members. This will still include the youth subcommittee members. So 4 of the 15 would be between the ages of 16 and 21 at the time of their appointment to serve as youth representation. And at least, I'm going to highlight again, at least 1, but no more than 2 of the 15 members shall serve also as a member of the Human Rights Commission. There also is a portion here that will change, that the term of members of the commission shall serve for 2 years, and except that the initial term of 7 members of the commission who are first appointed to the commission shall be staggered. So that way they all don't leave the commission at the same time. And then the biggest portion of this is that there will be an advice and consent piece to this that was not originally inserted into the original ordinance. And so we are asking that just as there is an advice and consent piece for the Human Rights Commission, and that process follows that the mayor makes the final recommendation to council, that this be put into place for racial equity in policing. And so that is the extent of my proposal today. Thank you all for your time. Are there any questions or concerns?
Darren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I may have missed this while I was taking notes, but the original core commission, or the original REP commission, received a stipend for their time and efforts. Is that proposed to continue in this future model? And if so, will it be the same amount of stipend, or how are we looking at
Yes,
that?
yes, council member, that will continue to be a portion of this ordinance. It's actually outlined as a compensation piece within the ordinance. And so all serving members will continue to receive a compensation for their service.
Council members, any other questions? Well, I just want to say, holy moly, you have one hell of a team. I'm so excited.
Thank you. I'm excited also.
Just like an amazing, amazing group of women that are like powerhouses, and I admire each and every one of you. And I'm so excited for the work that you are all doing and are going to continue doing. So, and we have an amazing leader in Coletta to make all of this happen. So, just really excited for this. I think that Mayor, you've done an amazing job at really promoting the priorities of Salt Lake City in diversity and equity. And I want to thank you and commend you for that, Mayor. So just awesome. Look forward to
Madam
it.
Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chair, would you like me to go quickly over the upcoming dates that we'll use to put this all into effect?
That'd be great. Thank you, Allison.
Great. So on September 7th, if any council members have questions, comments, concerns about the ordinance, we can do a second briefing during that work session. If we don't hear from you, we'll assume you're okay with it and use the agenda time for other things. That same night, September 7th, the ordinance will be on the consent agenda to be considered for adoption that night. Apart from that, in terms of the membership of the committee, on September 14th, there is an option to have interviews, the typical advice and consent interviews for any of the commissioners or all of the commissioners, should you want that. Again, that's up to the council. I think you're pretty familiar with all of the members so far. So you're free to skip that if you like. That's actually optional in the ordinance. And then finally, on September 21st, there will be advice and consent for current council members, commission members on the consent agenda, and that will be considered for adoption that night. So we've got 3 more dates coming up, possibly only 2 more dates coming up, and then this will be ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. It was a pleasure to meet you. I mean, see you. I know all of you. Hopefully one day we'll see you in person again. Chief Brown, welcome. I understand that you have some updates. And so I'd like, if it's okay with the mayor, unless you needed to introduce it all, Mayor, I'd like to just turn the time over to Chief Brown for some updates at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council. It's good to be with you today. Today, we'd like to talk a little bit about, next slide, Taylor, please. Traffic safety efforts focused on roadway safety and neighborhood livability here in Salt Lake City. And with any traffic safety effort or program, you really want to focus on the 3 prongs or the 3 E's of traffic enforcement or safety, which would be education, enforcement, and engineering. Next slide, please. The first area that we would like to, that we have focused on over the last couple months is the Capitol Hill issue of noise reduction up and around the Capitol that's been plaguing that community for probably all summer long. The first part of that would be the education and enforcement. On Friday, August 13th, we launched a media campaign. You can see on the left a Twitter reminder about safety and responsibility of your car and how much noise it's making. It was picked up by several media outlets, which was on the site. But this is good because the best way to enforce is to prevent. And so we've done a good job with putting that out with people. Another thing is that we found out that these groups were actually an organized car club. They were meeting out in the Sandy area and then driving down State Street, driving up to and around the Capitol, and then meeting up on the north side of the Capitol in some of the parking lots. So we're going to reach out to the car clubs to say, hey, listen, this although may seem rather benign and a good effort or a fun evening, it's really causing problems for those community members that live up there as you drive up and around that area. Next slide, please. Next would be our enforcement efforts. So Salt Lake City Motors, over the last 2 weekends, have gone out and enforced our noise ordinance on loud mufflers. The first weekend was August 13th through the 15th. That's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. On that evening, they stopped 30 vehicles in total. 7 received citations for loud mufflers. 3 had loud muffler or vehicle noise warnings issued. 10 citations were issued and 9 warnings for non-noise related moving or non-moving violations, and 1 DUI was processed. The next weekend, which would be August 20th through the 22nd, the Motors again went out. They issued 16 citations for loud mufflers, 2 loud vehicle noise warnings, and 2 warnings for other non-noise related moving violations. So a good effort. I think we're making an impact. We're also working with UHP and Capitol Security to have them close off those parking lots up on around the Capitol so they can't gather in there. And then we've reached out to UHP Motors to see if they could assist us in our efforts moving forward. So a lot of times these things seem, like I say, very, very small in nature, but for the people that live up there, I know it's impacting their quality of life. Any questions on that before we move on to the next traffic issue? Okay. Street racing. Street racing has been a problem in Salt Lake City for many, many years. And it's gotten worse over the last couple of years. There are really 3 areas that we are trying to focus our efforts. They're on 7th South between 4800 West and 5600 West, between 800 South between Gladiola, which is about 2700 West, and Pioneer Street, which is 3300 West, and 900 South between Gladiola and Pioneer Street. So really it's kind of the industrial west side area. And there are probably 3 reasons that they gather up there is because of the long, straight, narrow roads. There's not a lot of traffic and vehicle or pedestrian traffic, and then there's big parking lots to gather and to watch these events. Next slide. On 700 South, I'm sorry, next slide. On 700 South between 4800 West and 5600 West, we have set out now 2 sets of plates. And when I say plates, these are those big steel 1-inch plates. We put them across the roadway. We've also constructed Jersey barriers, which really constrict the roadway down to 2 different lanes, but they really don't have an impact of the trucks or the vehicles that need to go in and out of those areas. It has really had a big impact. Glenn Borders, who is the plant manager for Air Gas, has been very appreciative to Detective Oliver and mentioned that there have been no problems in that area since we put out those trucks, and that his trucks are not impacted by what we're doing out there. Next slide, and I think we have a picture of that so you can get kind of in your mind's eye what's going on. You can see the 2 dark squares on the ground. Those are the plates that really inhibit high-speed travel in those lanes. And the Jersey barriers are set up in the middle median, which kind of construct a diamond, which keeps the lanes separated. And then there are signs that warn drivers of the plates that are put out. Next. The other 2 areas, 800 South and 900 South between Gladiola and Pioneer Street. Today, we hope to have plates out on 800 South. And then we're working with Lorna Voigt to see if we can maybe get some Jersey barriers, because they have really had a big impact in that area. And then another set of plates hopefully will be put out today on 900 South. That area has really had an impact on Rocky Mountain Power, because they have an emergency response area out there where the trucks need to come and go. And for weeks they have been blocked by, if the street racers go there, they block them in and they can't get their trucks out. And then the next thing I'd like to update you on, council, is our recruitment. We hired a new class. They started Monday. This is class 154. A lot of very excited faces, eager to get into law enforcement. And to the right, that's a picture of the class. You can't really see them real well. They're a little bit small, but it's a great class. There are 20 new candidates that have entered into our new academy. We hope to see them in next year when they get out. But here's the exciting thing. Next slide, please. This is the diversity of this class. Please look at that. Of the 20 recruits that we have, 4 are 2 or more races. 1 is Asian, 12 are Caucasian, 1 is Hispanic Latino, 2 are Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and then we have 2 females. So this class is 50% diverse by ethnicity and race. This is really exciting for us as a police department, but I think it really speaks to what we've been trying to do here in the city. I've had a great partner, Director Deb Alexander and her team. I couldn't do this alone. She's been a great partner, and as we briefed you, council, a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, we talked about what we were going to do to try to increase the diversity of our police department and make it look like the communities we serve. And I remember very clearly Pastor Davis's words as a rep commissioner in my ears saying, Chief, we want you to hire the very best and the diverse candidates so that they can better serve our community. And it really is a tribute to the people that are coming into this police department. These are young people in a very difficult time for law enforcement that really want to make a difference. So I'm excited to pass that along to you. And then if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take any.
Council members, are there any questions for Chief Brown?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Chief, I'm curious about street racing reduction. It has been an ongoing issue for many years, and this may be a better question for the Transportation Department, I'm not sure, but what sort of permanent infrastructure should we do to prevent this? As great as it is that we found a relatively inexpensive means to curb it, pun intended, with the plates and Jersey barriers, but is there a more permanent fix?
Councilmember Ferris, that's a great question, and we've been working with Lorna Voigt and her team to look at different ideas, maybe some removable speed bumps. The plate idea is really been, as far as thinking out of the box and really prohibiting this type of activity has been great. The Jersey barriers are another thing. So This is that third prong of traffic enforcement or traffic safety. That's engineering. We'll continue to look and see what happens, but right now I think we're on a good path. When the snow flies, of course, we're going to have to pull up the plates, but maybe the Jersey barriers can stay, the signage can stay. But if we can make this an area where it can't be, or people realize they shouldn't be, or they'll get, they may receive a ticket or something like that. Hopefully, it'll discourage this type of activity.
Thank you. And I would like to echo the positive reaction we've gotten from the neighbors there, that Airgas and others. It's definitely been much appreciated. Thank you very much. And then I see Lorna
Thank you.
popped on. Is she have something to add, perhaps?
Sure, thanks, Councilman. We are looking at ways that we could, I'm trying to come up with the right word, gouge the road a little bit, put in some, not roughening, but more of a deeper thing that would disrupt the racers. Putting in roughening actually helps them get traction and go faster. So we want to make sure we can make it trickier than they can figure out. And we haven't quite come up with that solution yet, but we're definitely looking at it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, mine's more of also passing on thanks from the community, because the loud racing around and the modified mufflers wasn't just a quality of life issue. It was becoming a health issue, as people were doing it at all times of day and night and going through City Creek Canyon. It was like driving around inside a bullhorn. It was so amplified. And I know that it's probably not the sexiest part of policing, and the most exciting part to go out and have to measure the sound of modified mufflers, but it still is real police work, and it's the kind of work that builds goodwill and trust with the residents. And so I think it's really critical. It doesn't have to be every weekend. It doesn't even have to be every month, but doing it on a somewhat regular basis makes a huge difference, and people really notice it. So
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. It took a long time to get that set up, and I know there were lots of different barriers for lots of different reasons, but it's made a huge impact, and my residents are very, very thankful.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Councilmember Wharton. Appreciate your comments.
Council members, anything else? Great. Thank you, Chief Brown. Appreciate you for being here and for the update. We will move on to agenda item number 3, which is the Capital Improvement Program projects follow-up. Ben Ledke is here, and in reality, I don't know that we have a follow-up. It seems that we sort of all came to a conclusion last week. This was scheduled just in case we needed it, but I don't believe that we do, unless anyone has something incredibly outstanding that they need to discuss. I do just want to say that clearly not all of the projects got funded, and not all of the projects got 100% funding. But I think that the process we went through, and the way that we did it was the best that we possibly could, and we got to as many things as far as the dollar would stretch. I do think there's some policy things that we can talk about in the future, just as we gear up for next year's CIP and the process and things like that. But I think that can be put on another agenda. We can give our CIP brains a little time to rest. So unless there's anything that I'm missing, Ben, did I get everything that I was planning on saying, or did I miss something? Then we can move on to the next agenda item, which is, and we are voting today at the formal meeting on the CIP, in case we forgot that, or if anybody is listening. So the next agenda item is the North Point Small Area Master Plan update. I see Nick Tarbett popped on, and we also, I believe, have Nick Norris and Michaela here with us to answer any questions, but I will turn it over to our Nick Tarbett.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. The council is going to have a briefing on the North Point Small Area Plan, which when completed will provide guidance on future development and use of property along 2200 West and the Northwest Planning Community of Salt Lake City. The presentation that will be put up here shortly will have a map that will identify that clearly for everybody. The reason for the check-in is due to a resolution adopted by the council in May of 2020, outlining the policy and objectives for preparing master plans. That resolution formalized an existing practice by the planning division to check in with the council early in the master planning process so that council policy input could be incorporated into broad community outreach efforts. So with that short introduction, I will turn the time over to Nick Norris and the consultants.
Thanks, Nick. I'm actually just going to let Megan Moore from the consultant team kick us off and start, unless there's any questions that anybody has, but Nick introduced this fine.
All right, well, good afternoon, Council. If we can go to the next slide. Like Nick just mentioned, we've got just a really quick recap of kind of overall process schedule, some early feedback that we've heard, and a little bit about the site itself. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and keep you moving through your meeting. Next slide. So the overall process and schedule, go ahead, next slide. In regards to what is the master plan, so the area that you see on screen here is generally west of 215 there, right? I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's kind of this area between the airport and 215 and then the county line, right? There's a lot of environmental features kind of at the northwest of the site in association with the Great Salt Lake, a lot of business development along 2200 West. And then kind of in that north portion, the northeast portion, some larger residential lots, kind of that kind of rural county interface. What you see on the map itself, the city boundary is actually the black line, and the overall study area is in the yellow. So this incorporates both city and county land. And we'll get into one of those elements here in the next slide as well. But one of the reasons for the master plan is, of course, some of that increasing development pressure. The plan is a little bit old now. It's a little bit outdated. It is 21 years old. And you're just starting to see that increasing development interest. So being able to take a look at that and then also balance, what can kind of be some competing values in regards to the international airport, ag land, wildlife habitat, and of course, property rights. Next slide, please. And so the update, of course, we'll look at land use. That's one of the big things here that we'll look at and update. But like I mentioned, that's county and city land combined within here. So looking at annexation potential, looking at what that means, what are some of the requirements to do that. And then also looking at possibility of tools such as transfer of development rights in order to be able to conserve areas and develop in others, but also being able to balance those property rights. And then looking at things like appropriate infrastructure requirements, utilities, how this ties into the larger multimodal system. So not just transportation and vehicular traffic, but looking at transit, bikes, et cetera. And then the last two really start to get to that conservation, that habitat piece, as well as things like air quality, water quality, noise abatement, et cetera. Next slide. The overall process, the timeline itself, so we're still kind of just getting started, just getting rolling. We did have our first steering committee meeting just last week or the week before. It still feels like a Monday to me. But through this first couple months, we're really trying to get folks' feedback on the ground, what folks envision for the area, that being residents of the area. We've talked to some of the property owners already. The steering committee members, we've gotten their feedback. We'd like to reach out to the larger public. That will happen over the next month or so to try to get just their ideas of what they envision for the future. What are the key issues and opportunities? From that process, we hope to get an idea, kind of an overall vision for the area, and then moving into the fall and into the winter, taking a look at what that means. So taking a look at what a concept design, concept plan could look like for the area, and talking about some of the key opportunities as well as trade-offs and priorities. through that process, starting to develop kind of an action and implementation plan for the area and running that back by the public in a series of small group roundtables. And then come 2022, the next calendar year, taking a look at those concepts, being able to refine those into a recommended plan and plan document. And again, being able to run that back by the public for public review and then formal adoption. Next slide, please. And we just thought we'd hit on some of the early feedback that we heard from the steering committee. Like I said, one of the key questions, if you can go to the next slide, was, you know, in their minds, after we're done this plan, what would make this a success? And you can see kind of the overall answers here, but it tied into a couple different things. So one is implementation. So it's not just a plan that sits on the shelf that's unused, but really being able to take the strategies and actions from this plan and make them happen. Another piece of that, just educational component. So a 20-year plan, of course, you've seen a lot of turnover in elected officials and city staff. So that educational component or a guidebook just really kind of sets the stage and tries to live on, you know, for that plan horizon. So in the next 10, 20 years, even as guidance and leadership change. The next piece that a lot of the steering committee members mentioned was that, you know, this area is really fantastic. It's really just this great resource for the entire hemisphere, right? And so being able to focus on ag, cultural heritage, as well as the preservation of the ecology of the Great Salt Lake. But as I've mentioned a couple times now, just being able to balance that with property rights, additional development. You know, this is one of the last areas of city land available for development. So being able to balance and accommodate those in a way that works. And then the last piece is just that the process remain open and transparent. It gets people involved, gets people excited about a vision, but also kind of develops that trust, ultimately being accepted by community and elected officials, which would be you. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And then as for next steps, so we're trying to reach out still, do some one-on-one interviews with folks, like I said, to get an idea of what they envision, some of the key issues and opportunities. We do have an initial online questionnaire that's kind of ready to go. We're trying to get that out to the public as well, asking the same questions. And then behind the scenes, we're really working through a lot of the existing conditions and the mapping. So we've got a really strong constraints map to take to that next phase, which is that concept development. And with that, thank you for the chance to present tonight.
Megan, thank you so much. Council members, do we have any questions on this topic?
Chair?
Yes.
Not really well, I guess I do have a question, but I just am appreciative that we've got the consultant here discussing this, and I love to see the topics of annexation, because we've had threat of annexation with North Salt Lake. Are we, Megan, you can help me, are we including North Salt Lake in these discussions moving forward? Are they part of the key stakeholders in your discussions?
Yeah, so Sherry Llewellyn from North Salt Lake is on our steering committee.
Oh, that's
so she
great.
was part of our first meeting and will be through the process.
And then one last question I've got for you. We just need to make sure that the West Point Community Council is involved with everything that's going forward. They have, you know, Dorothy Owen, who is the chair, she has been highly involved with this, and just want to make sure that they know exactly when, where, what's going on, and that they're up to date and speed on everything that moves forward.
Yeah, thank you. And Dorothy is also part of our steering committee. And so she and I have actually been talking about ways to outreach to that community as well. So that will be included in kind of this overall community engagement plan through close coordination with her and that council.
Great. Thanks so much, Megan. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Council members, any other questions? Okie doke. I look forward to the continued conversation and see what we can do out there. So thank you so much for joining us, Megan and the Knicks. I appreciate it. And we will move on to item number 5.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, this is an ordinance renaming the People's Freeway Park to Ballpark Playground. I do just want to acknowledge that we received this transmittal during the budget process. So we're just moving ahead with this item. As many of you know, the park renaming could move ahead without us, but we are also updating the name in the city ordinance. And so that's why it's before the council today. But the mayor does have the ability to rename the park without our approval. But thanks for bringing this to us, Mayor. And I will turn this over to Brian for a little update. So Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The mayor has authority to name minor city assets such as park benches, trees, bike racks, and those sorts of things. But major city assets, including land, require city council notification. Once a major asset naming request is received by the city council, council has 15 days to respond to the mayor, indicating whether it wishes to use a legislative process for naming the asset. If the council does not respond within the 15-day period, the mayor may proceed with the naming. Council staff did not follow up with the council within the 15-day period, so the naming authority reverted to the mayor. City parks are named in Chapter 15.350 of Salt Lake City Code, and as you mentioned, the issue before you is whether you're going to amend that chapter to reflect the new park name. All of the parks in the city are named in that chapter of the code. So this is just an update process. And with that, I will turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, thanks everyone. I really don't have much to add, just that the Ballpark Community Council brought this to us, and so we have moved it along for them, and we have discussed this with Public Utilities. They actually own the property, and Public Lands manages the property. Both departments are in support. That's all I have.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Council members, any questions about this right now?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'm excited for this to move forward. I think it updates an old name for the neighborhood to match the current identity of the neighborhood, so I'm excited. My question is, do we have funding to change the signage at the actual park? Or is that something that we would need to, I mean, does that rise to the level of requiring a CIP application? Or is it small enough that it could just be done within general operating funds?
I can take that question for you. Thanks. You know, it is probably small enough to put in general operating funds. It's definitely not a CIP. If the bond funding comes through for the multilingual wayfinding signage, this would certainly qualify for that. And so it could fall under that. Otherwise, we'll figure out a way to put something up there through our maintenance budget.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council members, any other questions? I don't see any. And I know that this is not in the agenda, but I'm calling an audible. We are a bit ahead of schedule. And so we're going to take just a little break right now, 10, 15-minute break. So let's be back at 5. I hope that's okay with everyone. If not, you can yell at me via text or something, but break until 5. are on agenda item number 6. This is the public benefits analysis, authorizing the waiver of lease fees to facilitate the operation of an airport military service members lounge. We have Sam Owen from our office, the council office, and I believe the director of airports, Mr. Bill Wyatt, is also here. Hi, Bill. Good to see you. And you have some people in your conference room, so you can introduce people when we get to you, but we will first turn this time over to Sam. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issue before the council right now is whether, in alignment with the proposal from the administration of the airport, whether the city should waive the fees for services and a lease to the United Service Organizations to provide a lounge at the Salt Lake City International Airport. The space where the lounge would be provided is not on the same floor as the other commercial uses. There's a typo in the staff report, so it's important to clarify that. So if you can imagine going to another level, you know, it's not where you would access the regular concessions. Furthermore, the airport's estimate for the cost of the lease is about $23,000 a year, which doesn't, of course, factor in the cost for the specific services to the space, but that's, of course, assuming that the space could or would be used commercially, which I think it's realistic to say it might not be because it's placed on a different level. A little bit of history. In 1953, oh no, I'm sorry. In 1941, USO was founded by Mary Ingraham in response to a request from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to provide morale and recreation services to U.S. uniformed military personnel. President Roosevelt was elected as its honorary chairman originally. So just a little tidbit for those of us who aren't quite as familiar with this organization. One more thing to say, Madam Chair, and then I'm done, is that the state law provides some considerations for a public agency to consider in the context of a waiver like this, because the waiver is technically to a nonprofit organization. The council is not bound by those factors. They are enumerated in the staff report and of course in the transmittal, in case the council members are interested in looking those over. So with that, I'd ask to turn it over to the airport. Thank you.
Bill, it's all yours.
Okay, I was looking at the wrong thing. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you very much. I want to introduce Bob Kirkjian, who's the Western U.S. Director for the USO, and Shane Andreessen, who's the Director of Commercial Services here at the airport, and who, by the way, we recruited from Portland, where I went through this exact same experience with the USO. So we've had a lot of experience with them, and very excited that they're going to have a facility here at Salt Lake. Unlike most of their operations, it's going to be post-security, and that's important for a hub because many of the connecting passengers would have to go outside of security in order to access the facility. We see a lot of service members transiting through Salt Lake, whether in uniform or not, but definitely on duty. And so this will be a really nice addition, in our opinion. As the write-up suggests, we'll be charging them the grand sum of $1 a year. That's actually very common. Usually, to do something like this, the FAA would have an issue with us, but they've made a very specific exception for the USO. And as you'll hear in a moment from Bob, there are a lot of USO airport lounges in larger airports. So this is just a feature that we're able to add to the airport. It's a space that I think otherwise would be very challenging for us to use. And so, as I said, I'm excited about having the USO present here at the airport, and I'd like to introduce Bob to make a few comments. And this is the microphone on the phone. There we go.
Hey, thanks very much, Bill. Members of the City Council, it's my pleasure to be here, and we are excited to be coming to Utah. To the best of our research, the last time the USO operated in Utah was about 50 years ago. So it's high time that we come back to Utah. In 250 locations in 17 nations around the world, the USO has centers that serve our military and their families. And that includes in war zones and in peace zones and every place in between. Of the 30 largest airports in the United States based on passenger volume, 23 have USO centers in them. We're looking forward to making Salt Lake City the 24th. And pending any of your questions, which I will gladly answer, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to having all of you at the grand opening sometime later this fall.
Great, thank you so much. Sam, thanks for some of that history, and Bill and Bob, thank you so much for being here with us. Council members, do you have any questions?
Madam Chair, mine's more of a comment. This came several years ago, and I felt like we didn't get anywhere, but I want to just give Mayor Mendenhall, her staff, specifically Director Wyatt, all the kudos in the world to this. This is something that was really important, and Bill and I, Director Wyatt and I spoke about this several times and trying to get this forward, and I'm just so happy about this. I think it's a great opportunity for Salt Lake City, not only for our airport, but for our armed and military services in order to have this. So I have family member who are, they've always asked me, where's the USO? When's it coming? When's it coming? And it's so cool to see it's actually going to be coming this fall. So kudos to you, Director Wyatt, and to Mayor Mendenhall to make this happen.
Dan?
Amy, I want to just kind of echo what Councilman Rogers said. This is a wonderful program, especially for the young service members and their families coming through airports. Their life is already stressful, and this just gives them a little reprieve to sit down outside of crowds and relax. So this is a fantastic idea, and I'm so glad that Salt Lake City is stepping up to the plate. This is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council members, anything else? Excuse me. Well, I agree with what James and Dan said. I think this is great, and I look forward to having this as an amenity for those people who are in our military and armed services. And I think it's funny, we have a Air Force base just up the road and don't have one in our airport, don't have one of these USO lounges in our airport. So it's high time that we do it. So thank you for bringing this, and look forward to moving this in the future and seeing it when I'm in the airport and waving. So thank you. If there are no other comments or questions, we can move on. Thanks so much for being with us, Director Wyatt.
Thank you. Take care.
Okie doke, kids, we are on agenda item number 7, which is the Utah State Infrastructure Bank Loan Application. And I am going to turn the time over to Jennifer Bruno, but we also have Mary Beth Thompson, our Chief Financial Officer, and Marina Scott, the City Treasurer, here to answer questions and or talk about this. But first, I will turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The goal of this briefing is to gauge council support for pursuing a loan, a $7 million loan from the State Infrastructure Bank. This would facilitate a parking structure that would serve the industry neighborhood, which is a new mixed-use neighborhood under construction in the general area of 4 and 500 South and 6 and 700 West and some adjacent properties. Total cost of the structure is estimated at about $28 million. And the loan would allow for some parking to be set aside for public use, as well as allowing for an upgraded design that would allow the conversion of the structure to a non-parking use in the future as motor vehicles become obsolete. HB 2024 in the 2021 legislative session laid out a funding stream to pay back this loan from state transportation sources every year for the next 15 years. So theoretically, by the structure of that legislation, the city is a pass-through partner and no city dollars would be used to pay the loan back. That said, we just want to make sure to note that the legislation does have language protecting the state if funds are scarce, much like the city has appropriation clauses. And so in the event that the state does not have sufficient funds, the city would owe the remaining balance on the loan. This is the first time the city's used, that's my dinner. This is the first time the city has used this tool, so it's a little unique. Thank you.
Council members, Anna?
So what are the recourses? Like what do we do if we end up having to pay the bill? Like where can we find these funds, or why do we have to do it if it was just a pass through? How do we solve this when we have a limited budget?
I don't know if Mary Beth has ideas on that. I will say that it's more likely that it's standard boilerplate language like the city has, subject to appropriation clauses in a lot of our bond documents. It'd be pretty unlikely for the state to not to pull that funding while the loan is still in the process of being paid back. I do want to note that the legislation supplies us with more money than is needed to pay back the loan. And so, I think the potential for the state pulling back funds once the loan is paid off is the more likely scenario than while the loan is being paid off.
And
but in essence, the city's guaranteeing it with our sales tax revenue.
Okay, and then another question is, what's the process for people or for groups to get this type of loan, and we have to act as a pass-through? Who selects this? People asking for, like, who gets granted, or not granted, but loaned this money, and why? How does that all work?
Oh, I see Rachel popping on. Good, maybe she can help with that one.
Councilmember Valdemoros, as Jennifer very thoroughly stated, we have never applied for this funding before. The city doesn't have, specific parameters, although I think it's a great idea to put some into place for, how the policymakers would like us to evaluate these sorts of requests when they do come up. But I think that from the administration standpoint, this parking structure for this particular area is very additive to the neighborhood, particularly with the development that's going on there and the desire to keep housing costs low for some of the affordable housing development and the investment that's going into that area. Parking started to become a pretty limiting factor for being able to grow that space. So between that and then the ability to kind of future-proof the parking structure to make sure that we can convert it to a use that's not just a parking structure, as we get further along in our transportation plans, compelled us to want to apply for this loan.
Council members? Kian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern is we're trying to get away from a car-centric city, and here we are building a 926 parking structure, which is great. It's not all surface parking, but how does that match up with the development of public transportation and getting away from the car? And then the second thing is, if we build this structure and there's going to be public spots, does the developments in the area now not require? Do we push that they have minimum or no parking on their lots? You have a hotel nearby. Does it still require parking spots on their place? You have apartment buildings up. Do they have no parkings because they're going to park in this lot? so that we can maximize the development there and not just increase the number of parking spots? How do we zone it so that this area's parking is centric to this parking lot and not just continuously to expand further? Because I don't mind so much that we have to have a parking lot and multi-floor, but I'm also worried that we're just going to have a hell of a lot more parking spots. And yes, I like the vision that we're going to convert this into something else afterwards, but I always see that might be just a nice bonus that will never come to fruition because it will always just be a parking spot because there's parking spots there. That's more of a statement than that kind of a question, but I'm just concerned about adding more parking spots to an area that's already, we're trying to get rid of the cars. So
I don't think the administration would disagree with you on that, Councilmember Dugan. The parking policy and the underlying zoning and how it impacts parking in this area has been a pretty hot topic for the council too, I think. So it's a good discussion to have.
Thank you, council members. Other questions? I'm curious about the if we know how many of these stalls would be open to the public or what the structure of the that parking garage is going to look like. My understanding in talking with industry is that it's sort of a parking structure that would benefit several different developments in the area, if I'm not mistaken. But I am sort of curious as to if we know how many would be open to just public, or if it's office building spaces or resident spaces. And you may not have the answer to that. I just perhaps if we could find the answer eventually. And then the other thing that I'm curious about is the affordable housing aspect and what's the ratio from affordable housing to market rate in the developments that are going in over there. And, you know, in fact, James and Anna and I just had a meeting today with planning about our off-street parking ordinance, and the thing that we hear the most in not being able to have affordable housing is the parking issues, right? And so if we're looking at this loan and we're evaluating public benefit, then and we're getting a loan that the city is on the hook for $7 million to help this parking structure. I mean, I want $7 million worth of affordable housing then. Like, what is that ratio that makes sense that we're doing this and we're not just paying lip service to the idea that this is affordable housing and we get like your novel 2 units. So.
I can't offhand speak to the specific affordable housing development right now off the top of my head, but I'm happy to follow up. And then, you know, I'd also just add that I don't know that we would have wanted to enter into this this loan agreement without a funding stream that's designated to pay it off. This is, you know, not necessarily, you know, it makes it, I think, a little smoother for us to be able to, you know, have a designated funding stream that actually is even more than what the loan repayment will be to help us make this happen.
Right, unless the state decides to not. I mean, right, I mean, yes, there is a designated funding stream that is like held by not us, and we don't control that. And then if that goes away, and hopefully it doesn't, then the city then we use our sales tax to pay it off. And I don't know that there would be like a please forgive us clause in the similar to like what we have in loans. Like just kidding, we can't pay this back, please forgive us. It doesn't seem like there's that in this loan. So I think that we would have to just be conscious of the fact that the city is, at the end of the day, liable if something were to happen, right? So I think for me, if we are looking at that as a potential, then I want to make sure that there's a public benefit that can make sense to us. And that means, again, not just the novel affordable housing, but rather something significant and a significant public use for that parking structure.
Madam Chair, may I jump in?
Of course.
I want to contextualize for the broader meeting people who are here too. I know you know this, especially as years of being RDA chair, that what's going to be built there is exactly what the RDA put out to be built there, in terms of any zoning changes that were made over the 2+ decades of the existence of the granary district. The zoning that's in place there, we're not asking for a rezone, across that area, but most of all, it's this area of the greatest degree of investment, I surmise, from anywhere else in the city because of its proximity to the downtown, its blighted condition, and its opportunity zone overlay. So there is a public benefit there that doesn't fit through the public benefit mode that we do in a normal public benefit analysis necessarily, but where there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are directed by opportunity zone rules from the Treasury about how they can invest and maximize their investment, which is very much affordable housing oriented. And there's also a timeline attached with that, which we've been wanting and really had a lack of over the 20 years of existence in the granary until opportunity zones came in. And the kind of tracking and reporting that those investors have to make through the United States Treasury in order to net their benefits of the opportunity zone investments are actually, I think, much more transparent than what local government can demand of private investors, especially across an entire neighborhood. So there are, to be sure, big public benefits coming, many of which are affordable housing oriented, not necessarily, but notwithstanding our own zoning, but really because of the opportunity zones. So how much 90,000 per parking space parking lots have to be separately built, or how much can be massed into this request and free up more of that private capital for the opportunity zone directed investments like affordable housing units. That's, it's just a little bit trickier scale, but I don't think it's a muddy one than we've dealt with in the past through normal RDA processes. This is just the center of investment and delta of capital change that's going to happen in our city, in our 110 square miles, is all concentrated right here. So thank you for giving me 3 minutes to say that.
Council members, anything else? Okay, thank you. And we will move on to the next agenda item, which, sorry, very far away from where we should be. There we go. We are on agenda item number 8, which is our public utilities update. We have Sam Owen from the council office, along with Director Laura Briefer, our Director of Public Utilities, and her Deputy Director Jesse Stewart, and our Water Quality Treatment Advisor Marianne Rice. I will first turn the time over to Sam, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, that's a mistake by staff on the names agenda. Marianne Rice recently became the Deputy Director of the Public Utilities along with Jesse Stewart, but that's on us. Sorry about that. the department is here today to talk with the city council members about water planning and supply and drought and shortage contingency. Council members have been getting questions, of course, from people in the community, constituents, have questions themselves about the status of water supply in Salt Lake City and what the city can do in terms of both incentivizing conservation and then acting appropriately when conservation is not a priority for some users and maybe it should be. So with just that little bit of background, Madam Chair, I'd ask to turn it over to the department. Thank you.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. Our Director Brafer, thanks so much for being here. We'll turn the time over to you and your team.
Thank you so much, council members. And I also really appreciate all of the constituent questions that you've been passing along to me, that you've been receiving. The department has also received similar questions. And so hopefully this update today helps respond to some of those. But of course, you know, any other questions regarding the drought and water supply planning and our water conservation program, we are more than happy to address, as you know. I also wanted to clarify today for this presentation, I have our Water Resources Manager, Tamra Prue, here with us, as well as our Water Conservation Manager, Stephanie Dewar. And they are also a wealth of information on a number of related items on conservation. If there are any questions about things like creek flows, we've had a lot of those this year too. We've been doing a lot of investigation on those. But I do have a few slides to present, and I thought it would be helpful to first talk about how we're doing, sort of a check-in on how we're doing with respect to the drought response this year. And then Stephanie will talk about the status of the water conservation program and give you some highlights. And then I have a few slides about water supply planning. We've had a number of questions from community members, particularly related to can the growth that we see in our community be supported by our water resources? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we plan for that growth. And of course, if there are questions that come up as we move along, we're happy to be interrupted to talk about them. This is our title slide, but this is also our most recent U.S. drought monitor information included in here. And you can see by the dark red and bright red portions of the state, we are still within exceptional and extreme drought within our county and other areas of the state. So there's been a little bit of improvement in drought conditions, but not much over the monsoon season. Next slide, please. All right, so the first, I think, most important thing for us to talk about here is that, and it's really on everybody's mind, with respect to the drought response and our contingency plan, we are meeting the goals of our water shortage contingency plan right now with respect to this drought. And I think we need to, this is definitely very good news. We need to thank our community for that because our community has really stepped up to the plate. We have seen incredible conservation, especially since Mayor Mendenhall declared our stage 2 response to our water shortage contingency plan. We saw great response with that. Just to sort of remind you, our water shortage contingency plan and ordinances related to that are within City Code in Chapter 17.16, Article 2. The current plan has 5 stages of water shortage planning and response. And those stages go from the first stage, which is very much advisory and voluntary, to stage 5, which is extraordinarily restrictive and is really reserved for when we have a very significant water shortage, much more than what we're seeing with drought. So that could happen in an earthquake or with other disasters as well. Stage 2 is voluntary for our residents and for commercial and industrial customers, but there are mandatory restrictions for government facilities, institutional facilities, and I think Stephanie here has done a really good job in working with many of our government partners, both within Salt Lake City government and within the governments of other communities that we serve. Since our stage 2 declaration in May, we've seen overall to the date of August 6th, and we're still updating some of our demand information, but we saw a total of 5% reduction. We'll likely see more of that by the end of the irrigation season. But a big piece of the story here is actually since July 1st, we've seen a 15% reduction in use as compared to the average of the last 3 years. That is equivalent to more than 900 million gallons of water, which would more than fill Mountain Dell Reservoir. So it's a very significant amount of water that's been conserved. Next slide, please. And this is what that looks like graphically. This is data I look at every single day. It's the first chart I look at in the morning during the summertime, especially. But what this shows is the light blue line on the graph shows water use in the year 2000. And just to back up, the y-axis on the graph is million gallons of water delivered per day. And the x-axis are months of the year starting in January. You can see the general shape of our water use is peaking during the summer months. And that's expected because that's when the outdoor irrigation occurs in our community. But the year 2000 we use as a baseline for measuring conservation. Then the red line on the graph is the average of the last 3 years. So we can see what we've been doing the last 3 years. And then the area shaded in blue is what's happening this year. And this is an excellent depiction of the amount of water savings that we've seen. And that's where you can see that 15%, especially since July. I'll point out that this graph was updated as of yesterday. So the area furthest to the right on the graph was usage this weekend, and you can see how low it was. It was something like, I believe, 80 million gallons per day, when normally this time of year we would be at 160 million gallons per day system-wide. So that reflects, an incredible community response to the last rainstorm. People have really learned to turn off their outdoor watering systems following a rainstorm, not just during the rainstorm, but for days afterwards. So that's very good news for us. Next slide, please. And then I want to turn it over to Stephanie to talk about her water conservation program highlights. I wrote 2020 on the slide here, and that's because the most current water conservation plan was adopted by you in December 2020. So internally, we always call it the 2020 Water Conservation Plan and Program, but this is really highlights all the way to date in 2021, correct, Stephanie?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for having us here. The other thing I'd like to add about the chart Laura just shared with you isn't just the response during rain events, but since July 1st, despite the fact that July was the hottest summer on record, we've had exceptional reduction every day in water use out of doors, and culminating with a remarkable reduction during these last couple of rain events. So even without that rain event, we were well on our way to achieving our goals and reducing water use during stage 2 of our drought plan. So currently, so I'm going to share a little bit about the conservation program, where we are to date. And these are just some of the highlights. But I do want to take a moment to just sort of describe the difference between conservation planning and drought planning. Conservation planning is what we do to address
everyday or day-to-day water use and demand throughout all of our customer sectors. So that's residential, commercial, industrial, institutional water use, all of our water uses, indoors and outdoors, for sustained reduction. So we, through the water supply master plan, which Laura will share with you later on in this presentation, we determine how much water we have for our future, what we need to reduce to be in a safe volume of water demand within that, that future supply. And the conservation plan helps us get and stay within that future budget. Drought planning, on the other hand, is it can be both short and long term, but it's to address shortages in water outside of that planned supply. And so this could be because of changes in weather, it could be because of climate change, it could be service interruptions because of a natural disaster, it could be any number of things that cause that. And we address drought planning through both behavioral changes like the yard signs you're seeing around and things like that. Also operations and maintenance changes, which is a lot of what our parks and golfs are doing across our entire service area, but also capital improvements in measures to help us mitigate future impacts of future water shortages. So drought planning is really about what we have to do every single day, and the drought planning or the conservation planning is every day. Drought planning is what we have to do on top of the conservation. So some of the programs I wanted to share with you about tonight, one is in terms of we've divided our programming into 5 categories. We have outreach, and we've done very effective outreach this summer, both in conservation messaging, but also in drought messaging. This last winter, we launched a program called the 7-Gallon Challenge. One of our conservation goals is in the next year, roughly about 12 months, is to reduce indoor water use per residential property by actually to get it under a certain amount. And that's hence the 7-Gallon Challenge. And we've been pretty successful with that. During the summer months, another important outreach program is our water check program, which we do in partnership with Utah State University and the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. And this year we have done 178 water checks so far. Previous year, by the way, was 67. So we've had a great deal of demand, and the water check teams are working very hard to make sure that we accommodate as many requests as possible. In the context of those water checks, we've also done a number of HOAs, so large apartment or condo complexes, a number of fire stations, and several parks in our service area, Cottonwood Heights and Holiday also. So we do commercial, institutional, and residential water checks. We've had really good demand. This program has saved us over the life of the program hundreds of millions of gallons of water. And we know through analysis of water demand of folks who've had water checks in the past that the impact of the water check doesn't last just the year that they have the check, but it affects their watering patterns for years after their water check. So it's a great value, and it's a wonderful opportunity to educate folks about how to use water more wisely. In the economic programming area, the big news this summer was the Central Utah Water Conservancy District expanded the local scapes and flip your strip into our service area as of August 1st. So now all of our customers within our service area, well, residential properties, are eligible for those 2 programs. We've put out information about how to find folks are to go to the Utah Water Savers website, and we've done use Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms, and a lot of the other city communications groups are helping us spread the word about that. And I know we've had a lot of requests from our service area. I didn't get the number in time to put it in this presentation, but it's a lot more than they expected, which is wonderful. The other thing we're doing is this summer, Salt Lake City Public Utilities is doing a turf seed program. We've delayed it. We'd hoped to start it earlier this summer. We've delayed it because of the high temperatures. So we'll probably launch in early September, and we'll be making available at cost a low water grass seed for folks. It uses 30% less water than the standard grass. It also grows more slowly, so it doesn't need mowing as often, and has almost no fertilizer requirement. So we'll be launching that program later this summer yet. We'll also be doing rebates on spray nozzles and rain sensors. The last important economics program we have is are in the process of beginning a pilot program for commercial industrial audits. So these will be audits that are indoors to help restaurants, hotels, laundry facilities, commercial kitchens identify ways to improve water use within their facility and to work with them to do fixture upgrades or improvements or repairs. And this will be a fairly large program. We're partnering with Utah State, or excuse me, with Division of the State Division of Water Resources and the Central Utah Water Conservancy District. And we are in the RFP process right now. In fact, it closes Thursday. And that's this will be the largest commercial program we've done. And hopefully it will be an ongoing program. So it's not just this pilot program, but every year we'll be developing a full commercial program. The utility also is a water user. And so besides how we adjust, besides operational decisions we make about how we, where we pull water from and such, which Laura can go into more detail, we also use water as a customer. We have facilities that have indoor or outdoor, indoor fixtures or outdoor landscapes. So we are committing funds within our budget to make improvements and repairs on our own facilities. And one of them recently was the Concord Lift Station, which is at California Avenue and Concord Street. And we renovated the landscape on that facility. It's in a residential neighborhood. So we've redrawn the landscape to be more in line with the neighborhood and with a typical residential household, if you will. We reduced the landscape or the turf area by 4,000 square feet. And we've already seen a savings of 50% on the water bill for that facility. We installed a new irrigation system, which uses high efficiency irrigation spray heads, a smart controller, and it's fully hydrozoned. We've also going to be replacing what turf remains on that site with our new low water grass that we'll be selling soon. So we'll be starting the planting of that hopefully next week. We've been again monitoring temperatures to optimize planting, but also minimize the need to water during for establishment. The other thing we're doing is we're working on a system-wide water audit and loss control program, and we're still conducting the analysis of that, and we should have a report on that by midwinter, like January, February-ish sort of time. And that will give the utility both information about the efficiency and efficacy of our infrastructure system in terms of water loss, but also it will help us devise and improve existing programs that we already have in place for leak detection and repair. So we're hoping this helps us improve existing processes on controlling water loss within our system, which is a really important thing for all water utilities to think of. And we're following the protocols established by the Alliance or the American Water Works Association, what's called the M36 protocol. And we are in the process of that right now. Under the law and policy program, we are right now finishing up a review of our landscape and water codes to see how we might update them to better support both our conservation and drought efforts. And under research and metrics, as an example, on a golf turf study, which is in its third year, we have now planted over 6+ acres of a very low water native and adaptive grass species in the non-play areas. And that grass has not required watering in its establishment. I think they've only watered it once this summer, and then the recent rainfalls really helped. So it's really helped them reduce their water use in the naturalized areas. And then the last part of the research and metrics is we are still doing continuing our research in the CII water use category. And that's in part to get ready for our CII audits. And then something I didn't put on here is we're finishing up our commercial analysis through our water maps program. which is giving us information about how water demand compares to water need in a landscape. And that's another project in conjunction with Utah State University. Any questions? Or next slide, whichever comes first.
Stephanie, thank you so much for that. I wanted to just also back up and say thank you to our Parks and Public Lands Department and the incredible coordination and leadership that we've seen through that department in helping meet these goals during this drought, but then also the kind of long-term planning that's being conducted as well. So they've just been great partners on all of this. And Stephanie has just, she's been very busy this year. So she gets a lot of questions from customers via many platforms, phone, email, city source, everything. And she's quite responsive to them and very busy on that. So she's just doing a great job. Thank
you.
I'm so glad that she's on our team. If there's no questions about conservation and drought, I can go through these water supply and demand plans, but we did just throw a lot of information your way. So if you'd like, I'm happy to take a break and answer any questions on those two topics.
Well, and the other thing I'll add, Laura, is we do have our water conservation master plan on our website, and you can find it at slc.gov/utilities/conservation. And there's a link to the plan. There's it also provides summaries of the plan and program highlights. And so, and then at the end of this year, we'll be doing an annual report and we'll put that on the page as well. But if you want more information about the programs we just discussed and even more programs, the conservation plan that you adopted this last December is there for your reading pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this update. Before we move forward, I will just ask council members, I can't really see everybody's title, so if you have a question, jump in and ask a question. If not, I think that Anna,
quick question for Stephanie. Can just a quick recap of the grass that we only watered once at is it at a playground or at a park?
That grass is actually, we're using it at golf courses. And so the issue is they have areas that are naturalized areas that are connected to the irrigation systems, but they don't need as much water because they're not played. So they want to be able to cap those irrigation heads. But if they did that, then the grass would look dead and they get a lot of complaints. And neighbors who live in the areas of these golf courses also want to see it not look brown. And there's also concerns about potential fire hazard. So we worked with the United States Department of Agriculture Restoration Group to identify 2 grass species that we've been planting into those areas. So every year we're going to be planting more. And it's just a very low growing native wheatgrass, Snake River wheatgrass, and another wheatgrass from Uzbekistan, actually, that are doing exceptionally well. They take golf cart traffic just in case someone finds themselves in the naturalized or rough areas. It's not a non-invasive grass, so it won't hurt the fairways or the greens. And once it's established, it doesn't really require much watering, and it doesn't require any mowing. They could mow it once a year if they wanted to. So it's really going to, and it's doing a good job on weed control. So it's helping them reduce both water demand and then also their maintenance hours in those areas.
That's great, Stephanie. And is this something that you're looking at implementing in residential neighborhoods and commercial neighborhoods or commercial areas within our city?
Absolutely. We're working on pulling together a list of grasses that work in a variety of areas and creating a matrix, but ones that are very specific to our region. And our turf, our grass that we'll be selling soon is one of those grasses. And the issue with this wheatgrass is the availability. So we're working with our partner at the USDA to find some consistent sourcing so we can make it available, because it's very low growing and it looks like a nice little meadow grass. So in an area that is not as formal, it could work really well. So our issue with turf isn't that we have it, it's that we have the wrong grasses. And so we're working really hard with our partners, both at USU, the USDA, and the golf and park groups and others, another organization called the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, to identify much better species of grasses for us, and then to make them very available for our customers.
Great, thank you. That's
You're
exciting.
so welcome.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Chris?
Thank you. And sorry if you mentioned this, I might have missed it because I was taking notes, but do we have a tax or a user rate that's built into our drought stages that would create a financial disincentive for our biggest water users?
We don't, but we are working right now on an update of the drought plan, and that is one of the things we're researching. And they're called drought surcharges. They've been used by some water utilities, even in the West, sometimes with not good success. There are legal ramifications and other complexities with them. So we've been working with a national organization of, it's called the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and working with members of that group to identify best practices as applies to drought surcharges. In the meantime, we do have our conservation tiers, and so those customers who use the most water are in tier 3 and 4, they're paying more. And then water maps, which is our project with Utah State University that will help us understand the relationship between actual water demand and landscape water need. We'll actually, once that project is finished, which is soon, we'll be able to pinpoint address by address how much a property is overwatering. So we'll be able to deliver some very specific information to individual customers. And we're doing this program across all of our public service areas. So it's residential, commercial, and municipal sites, because using a lot of water doesn't necessarily mean that you're wasteful. But water maps will give us a very clear idea of the properties that have the most capacity to conserve. And so we'll have that more in play with all of our messaging by the beginning of next irrigation season.
Great, thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
That's awesome. Council members, other questions at this point? I don't see anything. So Laura, did you have some more?
We do, if there is time.
Sure.
We're happy to kind of go into the other part of this whole equation, which is how we plan for growth. And I wanted to walk a little bit through our most recent water supply and demand plan that we've conducted that forecasts out through 2060. That plan was last updated in 2019. And the reason why I think this is an important topic is because it covers a lot of the question and concern related to the growth in our community at this time. Especially during this drought, we've had a lot of questions about, a new high-rise building goes in or a new high-density development goes in. Do we have the water to support this? One question was, is this going to take away the water I rely upon? We had that question from a constituent as well. And so walking through how we plan, I think, is an important piece of this conversation. Our plan through 2060 is guiding decisions that we need to make right now about our water resources, about long-term water demand and conservation, about the sizing of our infrastructure, and about the risks and vulnerabilities that we anticipate facing. It addresses things like changes in regulatory and legal requirements. So for instance, we often have changes in Safe Drinking Water Act rules, or the way that we size our system. That was a recent state statutory change. It also addresses land use changes and growth, which is particularly germane to many of the things that we're talking about. And then climate change impacts. We've had a lot of questions about climate change as well, and how that impacts our water supplies. So the major components of this plan include projections on population changes, projections on water demand and different scenarios related to water demand, climate change factors, and then risk and redundancy factors. Next slide, please. And that photo is Big Cottonwood Canyon. That's Big Cottonwood Creek, one of our water sources, by the way. So first of all, we do projections related to our service area, the population growth through 2060 in our service area. Our service area consists of about 141 square miles, and as Stephanie indicated previously, it includes portions, all of Salt Lake City, but also portions of other communities such as Mill Creek, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, and a few areas of Murray and South Salt Lake and Midvale, some small areas of those cities. We look at those population projections, and we include both the resident population as well as employment projections. And as a result of that analysis, we expect that population will increase by more than 100,000 people in our service area by 2060. We also, in this plan, evaluated land use changes that are projected that included changes in the Northwest Quadrant, the new state corrections facility, and densification in our community. The last plan before was dated 2007, and in particular, at that point, the land use in the Northwest Quadrant was projected to be different than what is currently planned. And we also didn't have the state corrections facility in our service area. And then we noted that densification is happening at a higher rate. So we wanted to make sure to capture those changes and include them in our water supply planning. The map on here just shows a aerial photograph of our service area in that light purple color. There are a couple of little areas in blue and red that are other water service providers within our service area. One is Holiday Water in the blue that has their own water system. However, some of Salt Lake City's water supply passes through that system as well. So it's sort of a joint supply area. Next slide, please. These graphs are included in our water supply and demand plan, and I'm happy to walk through them in more detail anytime. But what I'm hoping to show here is that we look at two different things. We look at projected annual water supply and demand scenarios, and then projected peak water supply and demand scenarios. And this graph shows a lot of things, but all of the blocks on the graph show in acre feet the amount of water from various different sources. So the y-axis on this graph is annual production in acre feet, going up to about 180,000 acre feet. And then the x-axis is years from 1990 to 2060. And the dashed lines that cross these those colored areas are different water supply, water demand planning scenarios that we incorporated into the plan. And those different water demand scenarios helped us actually bring that information into the 2020 Water Conservation Plan to show what we needed to save in order to meet that population and land use, population growth and land use changes out to 2060. The different water supply sources that are shown here include our surface water sources. So those are our streams from the Wasatch, including Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, Harleys, and City Creek. We've got our wells shown on here. We also have the water supply from the Provo River project in Deer Creek. That's the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy storage. We've got wells on here that we only use during the peak times of the year. And then on the very top, some of those colored areas include potentially future water supply sources. So if we have additional surface water, so we hold water rights in Mill Creek, for instance, that hasn't been developed for culinary purposes at this point, but we hold those water rights for that future need. We also have wastewater reuse and new wells, which represent the lion's share of our future water supply source. We recently just purchased the remainder of our Central Utah project Utah Lake system acre feet to start putting into our system now. So that was shown as a future source, but now it's in our system as we speak. There are different demand scenarios shown on here, and the bottom dotted demand scenario that crosses the graph is the most conservative, and we call that one demand scenario 3. And then there's a darker dashed line that's demand scenario 2, and then demand scenario 1, which is basically the status quo. I should mention too that that red line that crosses the graph is our current demand profile. And we're already doing better than demand scenario 1, which is the old, well, not the old, the current, I guess the current state goal, but that's being revised. Since 2000 on our system, we've saved about 27.7% in terms of conservation. So that's pretty significant. The state demand goal was 25%. We are recommending that we meet conservation scenario demand 2, conservation scenario 2, which has some key goals for both residential indoor use and outdoor use. And Stephanie's conservation plan kind of gives us the pathway to do that, or better. We may be able to do better than demand scenario 2. Next slide, please. And this is a similar graph, but it refers to the peak day of our water supply and demand scenarios, and then overlays all of the different demand scenarios that we looked at as part of this 2060 plan. We look at peak day because one of the limitations in our peak day supplies is also the capacity of the infrastructure to treat and move the water. So this also actually informs another piece of our long-term planning, and that's our infrastructure planning and major conveyance planning. Next slide. The planning through 2060 also includes risk and redundancy planning, and we look at that in a number of different ways. The first is through a loss of a single water source. So that could be the loss of a groundwater well or some equivalent quantity of that loss. And that could be due to a number of different issues, a water quality issue, for instance, or an infrastructure issue, or a drought issue. We also look at a catastrophic loss, source loss, and we look at that in 2 ways, one for the annual water supply and another for a peak day loss. And that really informs us the kinds of redundancy that we need to put into our system so that we can continue to meet the demands on the system. For annual supply, we assume, you know, we included in the scenario if we lost the equivalent of Big Cottonwood Creek volume, and on the peak day, the loss of Parley's Creek or some equivalent quantity. And then for climate change, our planning scenario was a loss of 15% of water supplies due to climate impacts, or some combination of a loss of water supplies and increased demand because it's warmer. That would equal 15% of a change in water supply and demand. We based that number on looking at a lot of literature and consulting with experts at the University of Utah and Utah State University. Next slide, please. And the main conclusions from this planning process, first of all, conservation. We needed to set new conservation targets, which we did in our 2020 conservation plan, as well as implement additional conservation measures. And Stephanie highlighted a few of those, but there are others in our conservation plan. We also identified that all water supplies will be needed, including the ones that are future supplies that we still need to develop. But some of these new sources may be deferred depending on conservation measures. And then with respect to climate change, we do anticipate decreases in supply and increases in demand in our planning. And we also recommend ongoing monitoring and studies. I'll say that the water supply and demand planning is an iterative process, so we're not going to pick this up again in 2060. We update this every 2 to 5 years, depending on conditions. Our water supply and demand plan also meets a statutory requirement under state water law, where we need to show that we're holding our water rights for future purposes, even if they're not developed yet. That's what allows us to not forfeit water rights for non-use. So this plan also does some other things to satisfy some legal requirements. And I think that's my last slide. And we're happy to take any questions on water supply and demand. It's quite a process to develop that plan, and we're always thinking about it.
Chris? So how close are we to meeting that second stage of like rationing water? Would we, like, if we had another summer that was like this summer, would we have to implement requirements?
That's a great question. And one of the benefits for Salt Lake City, and I think one of the great strengths for Salt Lake City, is the fact that we are participants in water storage projects. And so Deer Creek Reservoir in particular was constructed to survive multi-year droughts. This year, we were able to receive 100% allocation of Deer Creek water. And so if we have a really bad snowpack this year, or a bad runoff or dry soils again, we would definitely need to look at that supply in particular to see if we would need to go into a further stage of water shortage contingency.
Okay.
And Stephanie, did you have something to add to that? I may have interrupted you.
No, you had the only thing I wanted to add is that's a really good question too, because as we update the water shortage contingency plan, we are looking at how we've responded across all of our customer classifications in terms of the drought response. And it's an uncomfortable lab to be in, but it's been a very informative lab this summer. And so we are also looking at potential adjustments to how we describe triggers, but also our response as a result of those triggers. And as we finalize that document, we'll be bringing it back to you folks for discussion and review, but to address really those exact issues. And same along the line with things like drought surcharges. But it's been informative how we've responded and the timing of responses this summer, and it is helping to inform our current planning process.
Thank you.
Council members, other questions? I don't see any other questions. I think that this was an excellent update, and as always, incredibly informative, and I really appreciate it. I want to just say thank you, Stephanie, to all of your outreach. Our community really depends on your guys' team and the answers that you give. And Laura, to you and your team, I want to thank you also for your very quick responses to my texts when I have constituents calling and asking me certain things, or I'm in the middle of a community council meeting and I'm like, what do I say? And particularly as it relates to the flooding that we've had throughout different neighborhoods with these last couple of rain events. I appreciate that that's what you call them, not just a rainstorm, but an event. And so I just really want to say thank you to you and your team for being there for our community members. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. With that, we are on to, we're a little bit early, but hopefully Stephen Meyer is joining us. If not, we could take a quick little 10-minute break. I don't know if he's on or not.
I'm
hear
here.
Yay.
We are having some video problems. Video connected today.
Is that because you're in Alaska, or?
That may be, yes, that's what I'll blame it on.
Perfect. Okay, council members, we have advice and consent of the Director of 911 Dispatch Department, Stephen Meyer. I had an opportunity to meet with Stephen. Is that yesterday? Today's Tuesday, so yes.
Yes, yesterday.
It was an excellent conversation, and so what I'd like to do is just turn it over to Stephen, maybe give the rest of the council members and the public a little bit of information about yourself, and then I will turn it over to council members to ask any questions that they may have. So Stephen, it's all yours.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Fowler. And again, I apologize about you not being able to see my bright smiling face this afternoon, but I think everyone has met it and seen it so far. So hopefully that's good for this. But I just want to say thank you to start with to everyone. This has truly been a humbling and positive experience. And I thank the mayor and, her staff that have the trust in me to, seek this type of position. And I'm just definitely appreciative of this opportunity. So with that, I have been in public safety, communications for 11 years now. I am currently the president of APCO and NENA in the state of Alaska. Those are two national dispatching organizations. If you're not familiar with them, it stands for the Association of Public Communications Officials and the National Emergency Number Association. We do a lot of work advocating for our 911 professionals, not just in the state, but around the nation. And we do things like, right now we're trying to get some legislative sponsors to, get dispatchers recognized as first responders, because I truly believe they are the first responders. And I tell you right now, you want a good dispatcher on the line if you have to call 911 and you're having a heart attack or a loved one's having a heart attack, because they will definitely know what to do to save your life. So we just do a lot of work, really advocating for funding to increase technology, and public safety is definitely a passion of mine, and that's why I took on those roles, because I think that we are, a co-equal branch of public safety, and we have a huge, not just opportunity, but obligation to participate in the fair and equitable, practice of public safety. We want to be equal partners, and so we have to act like it, and we have to take on those roles and responsibilities. So in addition to that, I manage a dispatch center here in Kenai, Alaska. I have experience from all around the country doing, larger dispatch centers as well. I have been everything from a frontline dispatcher to a shift supervisor, communications training officer. There's probably 100 different titles that I can't remember right now that I've done in between there. But I have done pretty much every level in the dispatcher communications field. So I feel like I'm a really good advocate for our frontline employees because I know what they've gone through, and I know how stressful it is to work, long hours. Sometimes, you're looking at other agencies and they're probably getting paid more than you are, and you're working a lot more than they are. So it can be frustrating, and I can relate to them. And I think that's where I will benefit this role and benefit the city and the citizens of Salt Lake, is that I can come in there and I can relate and I can help have positive conversations, and drive change where it needs to be, and keep chugging along where it's working fine. So like I said, I'm just really passionate about it. I'm excited about this opportunity. My family's excited about this opportunity, and I just ask respectfully for your advice and consent tonight. And, if you have any questions, I am definitely open to them. So I'm all ears for any questions that the council may have for me.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen. Council members, I'll open it up to you for questions.
I don't have questions. I just have a comment because we had, we were able to informally interview Stephen earlier and just chat about what he, what his experience is and how he sees he can, add to our city. And I was really impressed. I did leave a little bit earlier, but I didn't leave that meeting. So I heard you, Steve, talk about talk about some methods that other agencies have done to report an emergency, and leaving behind a little bit of the racial component of it, so that the responders know, instead of like going with this preconceived idea of what the situation is or who is involved. They have certain standards and methods to respond to a certain issue. So I did hear that, so I got really excited about looking into it. So welcome. I'm very excited that you'll be joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
James?
Yes, Madam Chair. And I appreciated meeting with Stephen as well. It was a great opportunity to hear his insight and foresight, what he sees to do at the department. But my question is going to be aimed towards Lisa Shaper, who is on, I guess, the hiring committee with a group of others. I want to hear from her what separated Stephen from the other candidates and kind of hear her take on the whole interview process, so those that are following along can get a better feel for what we're going to be consenting to tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Council Member. I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in. We undertook a very extensive, very tedious, very thorough hiring process because we knew that we needed to get this one right. Our dispatch 911 employees deserve to have an incredible leader who's got their back no matter what and understands what they do and how hard they work. And we knew how important this hire was. So I was on the panel. We had a distinguished member of our HR department. We also had Chief Brown and Deputy Chief McMicken on the panel. And so we took this very, very seriously. I think Stephen and I joke that we've probably spoken about 8 times just in the interview process and a little bit more informally in addition to that. But we did not want to make a wrong decision. And I will tell you that Stephen distinguished himself in every single interview. He answered the questions thoroughly. We grilled him. We asked him to come back and ask more questions of him. And finally, I will say for me, the deciding factor was when we asked Elise Haggerty, who has been working in dispatch for over 10 years, and who is our deputy director. She's been holding down the fort since Lisa Burnett retired. And I'm so appreciative of her and respect her so much and the work that she does and the respect that she shows for the employees. I asked her to meet with Stephen, and he will tell you that I probably didn't even need to be in the room because the two of them were talking about stuff that I didn't understand. They hit it off great. They understood each other. They understood the challenges. They understand where it is that we want to go as a department. And Stephen said it best, it's a co-equal branch of our first responders. Stephen does not report to the chief of police. Stephen does not report to the fire chief. Stephen reports to the citizens of Salt Lake City, and he understands that obligation intimately. And, she was so excited. Elise was so excited. I don't know if she's able to be with us tonight because she's been a little bit under the weather. But I will tell you that that was the deciding factor for me. Once she gave the stamp of approval, I thought, this is the guy. So I am super appreciative of Stephen for sticking with us for months, literally. This process has taken a very long time because we need to get it right. So thanks for sticking with us, Stephen. We're super excited to have you here. We're super proud of the way that you have shown up for all of this grueling interview process. and for the way that you've presented yourself so professionally over these past months. And any other questions, I'm welcome to take them, but really this is Stephen's show. So let me know if he can answer anything for you.
Thank you, Lisa. Council members, any other questions? You know, I don't have any questions either, but I do want to say that I was thoroughly impressed when I met Stephen yesterday, and really appreciate a couple of different things that we talked about. One being his work in Alaska right now with the state legislature in designating 911 dispatch as first responders. It's something that is important to me and is a priority for me, and that I've sort of been picking at for a little bit. And so I look forward to Stephen and his experience coming here and trying to advocate for our 911 dispatchers as first responders, because as he said, I believe they are our first responders. And then we talked a lot about just how, you know, the city is committed to an alternative response model, and like sort of thinking outside the box and being creative as we when we're kind of address people in probably the worst moment of their lives in a lot of ways. And where is the right response and who's the right responder? And Stephen's really was open to that and excited about that. And then the third thing I was really impressed with was his attention to our mental health of our 911 dispatchers. You know, I know that we have, and I want to say, Lisa, I saw your email introducing our new social worker at the clinic that is dedicated to our first responders, and how awesome that is. Mental health and making sure we're all taking care of our mental health is incredibly important to me. And you know, people in those high stress jobs need those resources, and I appreciate Stephen's responses and his sincere care for his employees is what I felt when I met with him. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this relationship and growing it, and having you move to Salt Lake City. Sugar House is a wonderful area if you're interested, but I just want to say it was really great, and I was really impressed. Thank you.
Chair Fowler, every single council member has tried to lure him into their district. So, you know, not a council member, but I also have told him Sugar House is pretty great. So
I do have 2 votes for Sugar House now.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us, and you will be on our formal meeting later this evening for our consent agenda. So thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I look forward to working with everyone.
Great. We're right on time. Report of the chair and vice chair. I don't think that I have anything. James, do you have anything? Excellent. Announcements from our executive director. Cindy, do you have anything?
I do not. Thank you.
Excellent. I do not believe we have a closed session today. So therefore, our work session is now come to a close. We will have our formal meeting at 7 o'clock, and see you all there. Enjoy your dinner break.